4 warning signs that appear before every reserve currency collapse. What if I told you there is a pattern, a chilling, repeating pattern that has appeared before every single reserve currency in history collapsed? It happened to Rome. It happened to Spain. It happened to Britain. And right now, all 4 warning signs are flashing red simultaneously for the first time in modern history. If you care about your savings, your retirement, or the future of the global economy, you cannot afford to miss what comes next. Stay with me, because by the end of this story, you will never look at your money the same way again. And if you find this eye-opening, please subscribe, because this is exactly the kind of content we cover every week. Throughout 5,000 years of recorded monetary history, not a single fiat currency has survived forever. That is not an opinion. Researchers have documented thousands of examples across 5 millennia. And the failure rate is 100%. Reserve currencies, the dominant currencies used in global trade and held by central banks worldwide, have a particularly brutal history of collapse. The Greek drachma, the Roman denarius, the Spanish real de ocho, the Dutch guilder, and the British pound sterling all held the throne of global finance. Every single one of them eventually fell. And each time, the same warning signs appeared in almost the exact same order. Okay? Warning sign number 1. Explosive, unsustainable debt growth. Every reserve currency collapse in history was preceded by a period of reckless government borrowing that eventually became impossible to sustain. The Roman Empire is the oldest and most devastating example. At its peak, Rome controlled a quarter of the entire world's population, and its denarius was the undisputed currency of global commerce. But Roman emperors faced the same problem governments face today. They spent far more than they collected in taxes. Wars, welfare programs called bread and circuses, and a bloated military bureaucracy drained the treasury dry. When the money ran out, they did something shocking. They started secretly reducing the silver content of their coins. Academic research confirms the Roman denarius lost 83% of its silver content between 64 AD and 274 AD, a period of just 210 years. The result was catastrophic inflation, economic chaos, and eventually the complete disintegration of the Western Roman Empire. Britain followed an almost identical path centuries later. World War I sent Britain's national debt skyrocketing from £650 million to over £7 billion, a near 1,000% increase in just 4 years. To fund that war, Britain abandoned the gold standard and began printing money with no restraint. The pound, once the bedrock of global finance, began its slow and irreversible death. Now, look at the United States today. The U.S. national debt crossed $39 trillion on March 18, 2026, a milestone reached at a moment of growing global instability, and the speed of accumulation is staggering. The U.S. government is spending $88 billion a month just on interest, a figure equal to the entire defense and education budgets combined. To make matters worse, all 3 major credit rating agencies have now downgraded U.S. debt in 2011, in 2023, and again in May 2025. That has never happened before in American history. History is clear. When debt becomes unmanageable, governments reach for the printing press, and that is when the real disaster begins. Warning sign number 2. Silent destruction of the currency's purchasing power. The second warning sign always follows the first, almost like clockwork. When a government can no longer pay its bills through taxes or borrowing, it begins to quietly destroy the value of its own currency. The technical term is debasement, but ordinary people simply call it losing everything they saved. Rome did it by shaving silver from coins. Medieval kingdoms did it by melting and reminting with base metals. Modern governments do it with something even more invisible and insidious: the printing press. Since the U.S. Federal Reserve was created in 1913, the U.S. dollar has lost approximately 96% of its original purchasing power, according to official Consumer Price Index data. Put another way, What cost $1 in 1913 costs roughly $30 today. On August 15, 1971, President Nixon ended the dollar's convertibility to gold entirely, removing the last constraint on how many dollars could ever be created. The Federal Reserve's balance sheet grew from $870 billion in 2007 to over $8.9 trillion by 2022, more than a tenfold expansion in just 15 years. Germany's Weimar Republic provides the most terrifying historical lesson about where this path leads. By October 1923, Germany's inflation reached an almost incomprehensible 29,500%, effectively destroying the middle class and destabilizing society entirely. People needed wheelbarrows full of banknotes just to buy a single loaf of bread. Zimbabwe experienced its own version of this nightmare in 2008, when inflation peaked at 231 million% annually, forcing the government to abandon its own currency completely. These are not just history lessons. These are warnings that every generation ignores at its peril. Warning sign number 3. The world quietly stops trusting the currency. This is perhaps the most chilling warning sign of all, because it happens slowly, almost invisibly, until it suddenly becomes a crisis. Every reserve currency collapse was preceded by a gradual erosion of international confidence, as foreign nations quietly reduced their holdings and began searching for alternatives. Britain experienced this firsthand after World War II. Despite still being technically the world's reserve currency well into the 1940s, foreign nations had been quietly diversifying away from the pound for years. The Suez Crisis of 1956 marked the end of Britain's pound sterling as a reserve currency, a financial humiliation that revealed the empire behind the pound no longer had the power to back it up. Inflation hit 25%. The government went begging for an IMF bailout. The empire that once controlled a quarter of the earth had lost it all within 30 years, not through military defeat, but through currency, collapse, and debt. The numbers today are equally shocking. The US dollar share of global foreign exchange reserves has fallen to roughly 56.9% as of late 2025, its lowest level since 1995, and down from a peak of 72% in 2001, according to IMF data. That is a structural, multi-decade decline that no single headline captures, but that history tells us is deeply significant. Experts note that reserve currency transitions tend to unfold gradually at first, and then accelerate with frightening speed. The BRICS nations have been actively pushing for more trade in local currencies, and geopolitical tensions have led country after country to question whether holding dollars is a political risk, not just a financial one. China and Russia are already settling energy and commodity trades entirely in their own currencies, completely bypassing the dollar. In 2023, Brazil and China formally agreed to use their own currencies in bilateral trade, a seismic shift given that China is Brazil's largest trading partner, accounting for over 30% of Brazilian exports. Central banks around the world added nearly 2,000 net tons of gold to their reserves between 2020 and 2025, one of the largest official gold buying waves in modern history. Gold prices surged more than 230% over that same 5-year period, a powerful signal that the world's financial institutions are quietly preparing for a dollar-light future. When foreign holders begin reducing their reserves at scale, history shows the tipping point can arrive with terrifying and unstoppable speed. Warning sign number 4. Imperial overreach and the weaponization of the currency. The fourth and final warning sign is the one that accelerates everything else when the empire behind the currency overextends itself and begins using its currency as a weapon against rivals. Rome's military was once its greatest asset, an unstoppable force that enforced Roman law and Roman currency across the known world. But the cost of maintaining that military empire eventually became one of the key drivers of the debt spiral that destroyed the denarius. Spain's silver real dominated global trade for centuries, backed by the power of the Spanish Armada and vast colonial territories. But Spain's endless foreign wars drained its treasure faster than the silver mines of the Americas could ever replenish it. Britain's story is the most recent and most instructive. It proved that even the strongest empire can fall within a single generation when its currency finally fails. The United States is still the only country able to project military power at any point in the world, but the room to maintain that dominance is shrinking fast, squeezed by growing interest payments and entitlement spending that leave less and less for defense. More dangerously, the U.S. has increasingly weaponized the dollar itself, using control over the global payments network and dollar-denominated trade to impose financial sanctions on adversaries. Sean was cut off from the international payment system in 2022. Iran has faced decades of dollar-based financial isolation. But this strategy has had a devastating, unintended consequence. It has convinced dozens of nations, including some allies, that holding dollars is a geopolitical risk, not just a financial one. Financial experts have noted that the weaponization of the dollar, the declining reserve share, and the growth of alternative payment systems have all made the de-dollarization trend far more powerful and far more urgent than it would otherwise be. Countries that fear future sanctions are now motivated to build alternative financial systems and settle more trade in local currencies, giving themselves financial independence before they ever need it. Major powers are actively working to limit the reach of dollar-based sanctions, making it more costly for the U.S. to service its debt and finance its global military presence. History is unambiguous. When reserve currency empires use their financial power as a weapon, they accelerate the very process they are desperately trying to prevent. So, where does this leave us today? All four warning signs: explosive debt growth, currency debasement, erosion of reserve status, and geopolitical overreach are present simultaneously. That is not to say the dollar will collapse tomorrow, or even this decade. Reserve currency transitions are historically slow. Britain's pound took decades to fully relinquish its role, but the pattern is undeniable, and across 5,000 years of monetary history, it has never once been wrong. Perhaps the economic advantages that reserve currency status bestows seduce governments into overextending themselves until the financial empire eventually collapses upon itself. The empires and currencies of Rome, Spain, and Britain all looked unshakable to the people living through their final decades. None of them saw the collapse coming until it was far too late to stop it. Now you have seen the four warning signs. You cannot say you were not warned. What do you think is the US dollar facing a crisis that mirrors what Rome, Spain, and Britain experienced before their currencies collapsed? Or do you believe the dollar is genuinely different, uniquely resilient in ways that history has never seen before? Drop your opinion in the comments below. We read every single one, and this is exactly the kind of discussion that matters most right now. And if this story made you think differently about money, history, and the world we are living in, please subscribe. We publish in-depth finance stories like this every week, covering the forces shaping your wealth, your future, and the global economy. Subscribe now so you never miss what comes next. The next warning sign might be closer than you think.